Hi everybody, welcome to or back to the channel. So today we are talking about a nonfiction kind of memoir book. Many of you are familiar with Elizabeth Gilbert from Eat, Pray, Love. This is All the Way to the River from Elizabeth. I love the colors on here, very pretty colors on here. I said many of you are familiar with her work from Eat, Pray, Love. There's also the movie for Eat, Pray, Love. She's been on podcasts, and I actually heard her on Oprah's podcast discussing this book. This was an Oprah pick back in 2025. This is very different than the books that I have read from her in the past. I think those of us who have read Eat, Pray, Love, we were looking for this, kind of uplifting story, and we thought, everything was magical if you, again, read the book or seen the movie. And we think, she went on this wonderful adventure and, made was this phoenix that rose out of the ashes, and she ended up happily ever after with Felipe. Jose was his name in real life, but we talk about in the book that she ended up with her true love and her soulmate, and they rode off in the sunset and they lived happily ever after. And we find out that that's not the case. And I mean, again, just like some of her other books, Big Magic is one where it's very inspirational and uplifting. This was very different than that. This is her talking about what life looked like after the fame of Eat, Pray, Love, and it wasn't just the smooth sailing that you would assume. I think, so many of us see these celebrities who, they have all this fame and fortune and what have you, and then they're still struggling. They have these demons that they're fighting, and from the outside looking in, we're going like, what the heck is wrong with you? You have everything that you could possibly ever want, so why is there still this struggle that is happening? But she is very honest and open in here about the struggles that she had, about her self-worth or lack thereof, of her not seeing value in herself, what she could bring to the table, about having all of a sudden this fame that she did not expect and did not know what to do with, and some of the unhealthy choices that she made to try to handle not knowing how to handle that situation, and even just with her romantic relationship. And she thought the same thing that we all thought with Jose, that they were going to be happily ever after, and there was still something there that just wasn't quite right. One of the scenes that stuck out that she talked about was she was just handing money to strangers on the street and just passing out money because she had all this money and she didn't know what to do with it and she didn't know how to make an impact. So she just thought, I'll just give money to random strangers, and getting that dopamine hit and that instant gratification. But obviously you can't do that forever. And then what happens when the dopamine hit is gone, and now you got to do something else with the money, or whatever the case may be. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting take on it, or way that she processed it. But ultimately at the core of All the Way to the River is her discussing her relationship with her best friend Rayya, who she knew for an extremely long time, was her hairdresser, and it went from a best friend relationship to something more. And it went not just something more, but something dark. Trigger warning, there is pretty graphic descriptions of, some drug use in there, language, kind of bordering on domestic violence, that kind of thing. So if those are trigger warnings for you, maybe skip over some of those parts. But I think she was very honest and vulnerable about what that looked like, and realizing that just because you love someone doesn't mean that you are right for each other, or that you are right for them and they're not right for you. I think she's very open about the codependent part of their relationship. And I think that when people are in codependent relationships, a lot of times they do realize it, and they do realize that it's not healthy for them, or that this is the best person for them, but trying to make that separation is so incredibly difficult. And I really felt for her in just reading the book and kind of the back and forth that went on, and just how painful it was for her and Rayya. And again, like the outside looking in, you're going, oh my gosh, how can you not just walk away from this person? But love is just, it's a funny thing that just takes hold of you, and you think you're going to be better, and you think they're going to be better, and that it's all going to be fine in the end. And that's the part that is just the constant tug of war struggle. So you really can feel her pain in this book. And I think there is, like I said, everyone just thinks you just ride off in the sunset and that everything is just easy peasy. Or I think it's very easy to look at that. You see the perfect family and you think that everything is great, or you see everybody's highlight reel on social media, and it's not that easy for anyone. And, you might be pining after something and not realizing how much they're actually struggling. So, overarching, I think, the question that I was left with was, who would you go all the way to the river for? You have to read all the way to the details in the end to find out what that means, and, what that meant for Elizabeth. But, do you have limits? Do you have limits along those lines? And do you have someone who can also double check you along the way? Because sometimes when you're in it, you can't see it. And that's painful in and of itself. And, you know, she's in another phase now, I think, where she is rebuilding and refinding out who she is. And you know, that's a theme throughout the book as well, of sometimes we think finding out who we are, you know, is this destination that we reach by XYZ age, and people continue to change and circumstances continue to change over time. And we have to adapt to it as well and be courageous enough to recognize that, hey, maybe who we were and who we thought we were 10 years ago is not who we are now. And being brave enough to explore who we are now, and maybe having to make a change if who we are is not who we want to be, and what that next step looks like for us. So, like I said, Elizabeth Gilbert, All the Way to the River. Would love to hear what some of your takeaways were from this. And, you know, so who would you go all the way to the river for? And is there something about yourself or reacquainting yourself with yourself that you need to work on now? And that's something that we all have throughout the course of our life.